comparing yourself to others is a trap. I'm sure you've heard that before. It's a common piece of advice not to compare yourself to others and just focus on your own work and path and progress. And it's not that simple in my experience. It's not either you compare yourself to others or you don't, right? There's a area in between that everybody really falls into. It's just where are you in between those two things, and how do you actually navigate comparing yourself to others? And that's what I'm going to get into in this video and my own journey with comparing myself to others in my various creative endeavors. So for 15 plus years, I was pursuing my dream of becoming a Hollywood filmmaker, screenwriter, and director. And that entire time I was comparing myself to the top people, the most famous people in the business, Steven Spielberg, people like that, Judd Apatow. That's who I was trying to become. And so anything less than that was a failure, because that's where I was comparing myself to. And that ultimately led to me just feeling like a failure the whole time. And I didn't see it at the time like that. Like, at the time, I saw it as, I'm setting my sights high. I'm very ambitious, and I'm setting my sights high, and I'm going to work towards that high, lofty goal. And there isn't anything wrong with that. It's just the way I did it, right? And the way I felt about it in myself. And I'm shooting towards this high goal, but I'm feeling like a failure the whole time because I haven't reached it yet. I haven't, and I'm just feeling bad about myself. I'm not giving myself really any credit for anything I am achieving. I made this independent movie, wrote it, directed it, and before it came out, it was finished. Like, we finished the movie, it was all done. I just hadn't come out yet. And I met this other director who had also just finished his first movie, and it had not come out yet. But my movie was a low budget independent comedy movie, and his movie was a big budget studio comedy. So his budget was like $30 million, had big name actors in it. And I met him and I was like, man, I wish I could have made your movie. Like, I wish I had $30 million and all these big name actors that he had. And he was like, no, you don't get it. I wish I had made your movie. Cause he was like, cause you had creative control. And this filmmaker, when made the studio movie, didn't have creative control. And he said the whole time he was making the movie, he was just arguing with the studio the whole time about how to do it. And he didn't get much sleep. He lost weight. He said he would just wake up in a pool of sweat. And so that was like an eye-opening experience for me, because I was comparing myself to him and feeling less than, and he was comparing himself to me and feeling less than. And I was like, so it's not just about comparing yourself to others. It's what are the metrics or the statistics or the categories that you are comparing yourself to someone else in, right? I was comparing myself in terms of money and budget and famous actors and big studio and big release in movie theaters. His movie came out in movie theaters. Mine came out on Amazon Prime and Apple TV, just streaming online. So I'm comparing myself on those metrics, and he's comparing himself to me on creative control. And we see there's one fault right there with comparing yourself to others, is like, how are you comparing yourself to others? What are the terms or I'm searching for a better word. I guess metrics is what I'm going to use. But point being, that's how I'm comparing myself to him. And then, but there's different ways to compare yourself to others. And it's, of course, and he was maybe 7 years older than me at the time. And he was like, you remind me of me 7 years ago. And he's like, you will get to where I am, and then you're going to realize that it's not what you thought it was going to be. It's not what you think it's going to be. You have a fantasy about what being a Hollywood director is, and I am that, and it's not the fantasy. And that is another fault in comparing yourself to people that you don't know is you actually don't know what their life is like. You're creating a fantasy about it, like I was, right? And it's not even real. So you're comparing yourself to a fantasy. You're not comparing yourself to actually a real thing. You don't know what's going on, how it is to live the life that they're living, how it is to actually do the work they're doing. Like I said, with the directing, I had this fantasy that directing a big studio movie would be like directing my independent movie, in terms of I get to do what I want. I get complete creative control, just with a bigger budget and famous actors and distribution in movie theaters. But that's a fantasy. And this director was telling me that's a fantasy. It's not actually that. You're not going to get that, right? That's another big trap or fault in comparing yourself to these other people that you don't know, is just, you don't know. It's you're creating a fantasy, and you're comparing yourself to fantasy, not actually how their life is or what your life would be like if you were able to achieve what they achieve. That's another issue. You're only seeing them, let's say their life is good, because obviously there's successful people whose lives are good. You didn't see all the struggle. You're looking at how they are now, and they're not overnight. There's almost no actual overnight successes, right? Most overnight successes take years. And so there's a lot of struggle that goes on, and you're comparing yourself to perhaps the person after they've crossed the finish line, even though there really is no finish line until death. But you're not seeing all the training and all the blood, sweat, and tears and years it took for them to get there. And so comparing yourself to the struggle and to the hustle and to the building and the working and the training, that's a better comparison, right? Comparing yourself to someone after they've won the race, so to speak, makes no sense. You got to compare yourself to the hard work and the struggle, right? So that's another thing with the comparison, is like, you're comparing yourself to the wrong point in time. You're at a certain point in time, you got to compare yourself to that person when they were at your point in time, when they were at your stage. What were they doing? How were they working and hustling and thinking? And that's what you got to tap into. And that's the trouble. That's actually part of the reason I'm making these videos every day. And this is day 50 something in a row making these videos, is so you could see my struggle. Now, is anyone going to care in 5 years? I hope so. Obviously, I'm working towards creating success for myself in my life. And so hopefully people will be able to look back at this in 5 years and connect to my struggle. They'll see me going through it, and then they'll connect to that and not connect to me when I've reached a certain level of success in 5 years. Because it's hard to find this kind of thing. You find whatever it is, biographies, autobiographies, or whatever content where people are talking about their struggle in the past, but it's in the past, and they're just telling a narrative that they've constructed in hindsight, and they're picking and choosing what to say and how to convey it and make it work in the narrative, that whatever they're telling is not the same as seeing it when it's happening. So that's a big reason I'm documenting my life right now with these videos, is so you can see it when it's happening, and hopefully it gives you something to connect to and inspires you to like work through the struggle and not be so focused on that destination that that you have in mind, that you're focused on someone that's super successful, and like you're comparing yourself to that instead of comparing yourself to the struggle that you're in right now, right? I'm nearing the end of this video, because this is really the point, is there is no escaping comparing yourself to others. Like, you can't not compare yourself to others, simply because that's how we're wired. We evolved in tribes, and your status in the tribe affected your chances of survival, of getting a better mate, getting better resources in terms of food and shelter and all that. Status, and meaning how you rank in comparison to others, is baked into our genes. It's from evolution. So you can't escape that. You're always going to compare yourself to others in one way, shape, or form. The point of this video is to perhaps change how you're comparing yourself to others, and not necessarily comparing yourself to others in terms of money or fame, right? Or views or followers online, right? And changing, perhaps comparing yourself to others in terms of how fulfilling is your life? What are you doing meaningful things with your life? Are you contributing value to other people? And this doesn't mean in terms of charity, although that's great, obviously, but just in terms of what you're doing with your work and your daily life, and are you adding value to other people's lives, and are you doing something meaningful? And that's another way to compare versus just money and fame and followers. And then also, so it's what are the metrics or the categories that you're comparing yourself to, and then also, right, where, as I mentioned, where in the process of that person's journey are you comparing yourself to them? Is it now they're 5 years ahead of you? Well, you got to compare yourself to them 5 years ago, and just where they were. And that doesn't mean age. Don't compare yourself to someone who was where they were when they were your age, because that's not appropriate. It's not fair. You have to compare yourself to them when they were in the process. Meaning, if somebody started a particular career path or craft, right, when they were 15, and you're 35, and you just started, this year, and you're comparing yourself to where they were when they were 35, but at that point they'd already been doing it for 20 years, that makes no sense. So you can't compare yourself because I fell into that trap a lot in Hollywood. I was comparing myself to other filmmakers when they were my age, and somebody like a Steven Spielberg or a Quentin Tarantino, who made big movies when they were in their late 20s. And I was comparing myself when I was that age, like 27, I think they were, something around there, when they made their first big movies. At that age, I was comparing myself to them at that age. But Steven Spielberg had been making movies since he was like 8 years old, and I hadn't. I really didn't get into it till I was in my 20s. And so that comparison didn't make sense, because at that point, he had been making movies for almost 20 years, whereas I had been just started. So so you can't compare yourself to someone in terms of age. It's just how long have you been doing it? Where are you on the journey? And not just how many years or months or days have you been doing it, but how many hours. If you work on something once a week for 5 years, that's not the same as doing it every day for 1 year, right? There's a whole different, you get the point I'm making. Compare yourself, but make sure you're actually compare yourself to the right point in time and the right amount of work and effort that's been put in so far. And then just keep in mind that you don't actually know what someone's life is, and the person you're comparing yourself to that you don't know, the famous person, it's probably a fantasy. You've probably created a fantasy around what their life is actually, and what's actually like to be them and do what they're doing. So just keep that in mind, that you probably have a fantasy in your mind, and that basically everyone's life has a lot of challenges. It's not really easy to be human, as much as we look at other people's lives and be like, oh, it must be so easy to be them. They have so much money. They have so much fame they can get. For me, they can get any movie made. Steven Spielberg or someone like that can basically get any movie made. But he's facing challenges every day, right? He's not experiencing some state of never-ending bliss in his life, right? No one is. It's very easy to create that fantasy around someone else's life. And so just realize that it's a fantasy, and that there's always going to be challenges. There's always mountains to climb, no matter how successful you get. Accepting that and getting into, that's what life is, right? Life is climbing mountains, and then there's another mountain. And it just goes on. And so finding a way to find some fulfillment and enjoyment on the climb, during the climb, and not just wait till the peak, and not feeling like a failure while you're climbing, like until you don't feel like you're only a success until you reach the top of the mountain. Find some wins along the way and give yourself some credit that you're climbing. Give yourself some credit that you're climbing. You're not just turning around and going back down to the bottom of the mountain. You keep climbing. So you got to give yourself credit for that. And remember that when you literally climb a mountain, let's say climb Mount Everest, right? Tallest mountain in the world. If you could go and climb Mount Everest, you only spend 15 minutes at the peak. When someone climbs Mount Everest, they don't move in to the peak of the mountain. They spend 15 minutes up there. So most of the time, climb Mount Everest is the climb, right? It takes, I don't even know how long it takes, days, weeks, I think. And then they spend 15 minutes at the top. So just keep that in mind, that it's all about the climb. Your whole life is the climb. It's not the peak of the mountain. So that's it for this video. Tune back in tomorrow. I'm making these videos every day to, like I said, document my journey and my climb of the mountain. And thanks for watching.